All right, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this webinar on web marketing ROI, return on investment. And please let me introduce myself, Michiel van der Watering from the Netherlands. And I founded my firm Accountable Marketing 2004, working on companies to help them as marketing manager, interim marketing manager, project manager, to make their marketing effectiveness increase by introducing the concept of accountability of marketing and return on investment when it comes to marketing investments. Besides that, I'm also a lecturer at business schools because the management of the business schools found out that their future employees of their graduates were really looking for people who understand the concept of, well, what do you bring me with your accountability? So don't be just responsible, but also be accountable for all the funds that we gave. And I wrote a book about it called in Dutch Marketing Kassa, which best translates to like a marketing register or marketing till, where I mean that the marketeers have to be accountable. They have to pay results for the money that they take from the company to build their marketing. So in the beginning of this year, I've translated the book into Yes, Accountable Marketing, because I really believe it's time for marketeers to stand up, become accountable, and that will be there, as they say, the golden ticket back into the boardroom or to the C-suite. And so they get grip of the marketing budget throughout the whole year instead of getting rid of a part of the marketing budget because there are problems elsewhere in the company. Because if you look at a company, most companies, all parts are accountable except for marketing. Marketing seems to be able to get away with it and do what they want to do or need to do. And I also found out that marketeers are not often very proud of what they're doing, or they're pestered about by their colleagues because they can show the results. So I think that's enough about me, and I would very much welcome Jim Lenskold here, who wrote the book. I've got it here in front of me, of course, Marketing ROI, and explaining the whole concept of all kinds of types of marketing ROI and how to calculate it. So please, Jim, if you would like to introduce yourself to the audience, that would be very nice. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Michiel. So, especially to be in the presence of someone who believes it and is another champion for the accountability, the ROI, the things we think should be obvious for a business practice. And obviously, we need advocates like us, right? So. But in terms of background, so Jim Lenskold, my company Lenskold Group has been around 21 years now. My background comes from AT&T. That's where, oddly enough, marketing ROI did find its way into a big corporation in the 1980s, but a little bit misunderstood maybe in the beginning. But the finance group came down and said, hey, you need to be measuring this, you need to be reporting this. And obviously, what I did there as a marketing manager and that discipline that I got early in my career certainly shaped it from that point. And then when I started my company, it was initially strategic marketing and helping drive effectiveness. But I quickly shifted over to where I thought there was a great need, and that is, how do we get the measurements, the analytics to focus on not the early stage outcomes from marketing, but taking it all the way to sales, revenue, profit, right? That's where we get the ROI. And I think what's worked well, and what I've tried to do for my clients, is make sure that even though we're doing the financial analysis, even though we're doing the analytics, that everything we do is part of strategy and part of decision support. So measurements tend to look backwards. We make sure that we set the measurements in such a way that it's going to be more looking forward, right? So I'd rather measure something that I can apply and improve effectiveness than just look back and try to just prove out what I did. So that's the kind of discipline we get into. I think what we've seen in terms of over these 20 years, the beginning was, where do I get data? Now we're in the world of, what do I do with all this data, right?
Yeah, right.
But and you and I have talked before. One of the biggest steps that people need to take to get there, and steps meaning not an individual but as a group, is the mindset. It's that mindset of that if we take the time and effort, if we get good information, We're going to influence customer behavior. It's not about numbers. It's about, you still have creativity, you still have offers, messaging, targeting, all the important things of marketing. What we're trying to do is get that feedback loop. How do I know when it's working? How do I know when it's not? And that's what I think drives people like us, right? At the end of the day, it's not showing a big number. It's not, it's showing that marketing matters and is relevant to the business.
Yeah. And the thing you just said about data is quite interesting, because every now and then I meet a customer and they're telling me, well, the data that you're suggesting that we need, we don't have it. And I call them a month later and they still say, well, we don't have it. But other customers, they're much smarter and they start collecting the data as of the first time that I pop up the question. And after a couple of months, they've got their data. So not that much, not the big data ready, but they've got some data ready.
Right.
And then we can start building the program or building the model. Yeah.
Right. But digital marketing, a lot of on the B2B side, you've got the marketing automation that feeds into sales systems. I mean, there's a lot of things that have helped improve the data. Again, it's still knowing what to look for and how to use it that makes the bigger difference. And I think to your point, it's not like we have to have all the data and try to solve everything. We can take steps and do this in small increments.
Absolutely, yeah. If you try to solve it all at the same time, it will take you years before you've got anything ready. So just start with the very simple thing. Just put down your goals, write them down for your next campaign in small parts in your funnel, and see where it gets you. And the first time you don't have a clue, that's no problem. It will give you a clue afterwards whether your prospects were okay, or that you were exaggerating or too enthusiastic in your goals.
That's right.
And,
that's right.
And that will help you, or the other way as well. I mean, if you're too pessimistic about the results and the results are overwhelming, you on one hand are the champion within your company as marketeers or sales representatives because you take in a lot of customers. But probably some people in operations will not like you very much because they get an overload of customers, which they didn't expect. So, yeah, you just start working on it, and then it will be okay, I think. Jim, I've got your presentation ready to share.
Yeah, let's do that, because I think what we wanted to do is we'll do just a little bit of presentation up front to get everyone on the same page, make sure we have definitions set. And then from there, we'll just come back to the conversation. So what we wanted to start off with was this definition. So, I wrote this paper with a bunch of great academics, some people I really respect a lot. And it was a very thorough academic paper. In fact, it was 20 pages long and it took a year to write, which on the business side, we tend to write, 2 pages and we write it in a week, right? Because that's just the way, I think that's the way we think. But it was a great process and exercise for me. So what I thought for today is I thought I'd start with kind of my definition on the simple side, and then we'll touch into what we learned from going through this process with the academics. So I define, let's put it this way. Finance defines marketing ROI as net profit over the investment, right? And so you could break the net profit down into what's the profit we earn from our incremental sales. And so that would be called gross margin. It's kind of but it is profits, not revenue. We subtract out the marketing investment, we divide it by the marketing investment. So it gives us a ratio. If we spent $1 million and we made $1 million, that's going to be 0%, right? So anything above break even is positive, anything below is negative. And you can see then what goes into that, I think, is important. So on the left, we have the expense side. We have marketing expenses. We generally know that. In some cases, we include staff expenses and even the sales team expenses. Great exercise. A lot of good insight comes out of that. I'll hold off for a moment on the offers. On the right side, we have the return, right? The financial return. So that kind of is a flow down that says, all right, we influence the sales funnel, the buyer's journey. We generate the incremental sales. From there, we get revenue. From there, a portion of that is that gross margin, right? It's kind of a profit. And then the offers is kind of interesting, and we won't go into that detail today, but it's something that ends up falling on both sides of the equation, right? And what we're trying to do is to say with an offer, a financial incentive, a discount, we'll give up some revenue, some profit that falls on the expense side, but then we'll also we'll give some offers out to the incremental as well. And it's just a little bit of a tricky math thing, but the nice thing is it's set up so it'll get us to the right decision. That's what we care about most, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of, yeah, good.
Yeah, maybe we should elaborate a little bit more about incremental, because that's a term that you use often. And I think
yeah, we're going to build to that, right? Because incremental, right?
Marketing, yeah.
Right. Actually, at this point, the highest level definition of incremental, we'll just say, is that when we spend this money, which is kind of an increment of money, how does it influence this sales funnel, the buyer's journey, which has lots of other touch points, and so that everything that we count on the sales is meant to be incremental. So at least in a definition standpoint, if we didn't spend the money, we wouldn't expect that sales. All right. So now when we'll move into measurement.
But meanwhile, I can just elaborate a little bit more about the book I just mentioned. Yes, Accountable Marketing, with a big yes, an exclamation mark, because as I said earlier, I think it's really time to move on for marketeers. And I see that marketeers are really in need and even wanting to become accountable. And when I talk about marketeers, it can be the CMO, marketing director, marketing manager, senior marketeers, and I think even people in sales are very keen on getting the accountability of marketing working within the company, because that will enable them to show what they're doing with the sales budget together with the marketing budget. And we really need people to work on that, and to get, especially the marketeers, get them back proud again about what they're doing. Just a short example in between before Jim gets back is when I spoke to a marketing manager, a brand manager, and he was really confused because his colleagues were pestering him that they had let go. People had to fire some people, maybe about 15 or 20 at a time, and he was unable to tell them, well, okay, I'm working on the social media events, and I'm working on guerrillas on the internet, which gives me the opportunity to keep people on board instead of firing 30 people. We now just have to let go of 15 people. And he wasn't able to prove that. So he was really keen on becoming accountable and showing his colleagues, his peer in the C-suite, in the management board, that marketing really contributed to the bottom line.
So this is just to make sure it's tangible to people. And this is a really simple campaign. This is just around one event. Same ROI equation works though if we did a whole program for a whole year, right? The idea is on the left side we have our expenditures. So we have our campaign development, advertising, our mailings in this case. We have that staff expense I mentioned. Then you can see on the right we have this kind of the funnel flow. So we start with when we spend the money, we have reach. What happens as a result of that reach? And so out of 12,000, we net down to 60 sales. That's going to drive the financials. But strategy-wise, we want to know what happens. So whatever touch points and whatever outcomes we have in the middle here, in this case, it's an event. So register an event, attend, set the sales contact. That tells us what to do differently if we're going to rework this scenario, right? But once we can either estimate, measure whatever we're doing here, and we know the incremental sales we're counting on, we can then convert that into revenue using the average revenue, convert that into margin using a profit percent there, our margin. And in this case, we can see that our return, the 53,000, is just a little bit above our spend of 50,000. So we're at a 7.5% ROI. Now, we want to run this ROI in the planning stage. We want to run it as we get results. And of course, we always ask, what would we do better? Right, so that's in a simplified view, it's this idea of the return relative to that spend. So now what's interesting is you can see what's built in the center here. This is what we did with the academics. So Paul Farris, Dominic Hansens, and Dave Reebstein, all just very well respected people I think very highly of. So we took this idea of incremental sales, saying, all right, when we do ROI, the definition is, as I just defined, is we spend money and the sales will represent revenue and then margin, profit margin. But what we were interested in and what this detailed paper goes into is to say there might be other ways to get return, even if it's not perfect. So if you take one step back, it may be that we measure a funnel outcome, and that's our lift. And that's where a lot of marketing goes today, right? And so in most cases, then what what we were looking at is to say, all right, that funnel outcome, I would call that kind of a projected sales. You'd still say, well, what's our average conversion? And I'd still run the ROI scenario. There was another version of ROI. It wasn't exactly ROI, but it's kind of a cost comparison view where we tied to impressions, right? So what if we could buy impressions at a lower cost? We still get the benefit of those impressions in terms of the branding. So again, maybe there's kind of a return at that high level. But you can see, again, I really tie and hold strongly to the incremental sales. But what was interesting, and I think what a lot of people actually look for and some really measure, and this is kind of at the advanced level, is when we generate those sales, we're actually generating more than just the short-term sales. And even if we count, value of customer over time from a revenue stream, there is this customer equity, right? As we build the customer base, that has value. Mm-hmm. Now the next marketing can go out to a bigger base and be more profitable. We build marketing assets. That would be your brand equity. That would be the fact that maybe we reuse content. Maybe the fact that the marketing we do today influences the marketing of tomorrow. And so we do in the paper kind of break these down, and I think they're all valuable. I think what's most important is, are we being honest and in terms of the amount we're spending and what we're counting against the spend as a return, right? We have to be careful with this brand equity, with this customer equity, that we don't count it to a current campaign or promotion and then go and later count it again with the next one, right? It's this, that's what becomes a little bit messy. But as long as we have, we define what the decision is we're trying to make. It could be something, do we do this campaign or do we not do this campaign? Do we increase the spend on that campaign or do I change something within the campaign, right? As long as you tie it back to the decision, I think it becomes fairly easy to define.
Yeah. And talking about customer equity and marketing assets, I have read an interesting quote on the Miles B website. And it says like all kind of departments in a company can buy value, and only marketing can create value for a company.
One thing I've found that comes up, and it's interesting how it relates to ROI, but I always like when companies look and say, marketing should own the customer relationship, even though there's a sales team, even though there might be channel partners, because I think marketing is well positioned to have that holistic view, and that's what ties to the buyer's journey, right? But who else in the organization can kind of consider all these touch points? So you have, right, the buyer's journey in generic terms, from awareness to defining needs and preference and purchase, but satisfaction, everything like that. A sales team may be focused on driving conversion and purchase and revenue, but marketing is the one that seems like they would be attentive to say, well, look, if they weren't satisfied with that purchase and they're not going to repeat and they're not going to have loyalty, maybe we should change something. I just find that to be a good perspective, right? And this ties it all together for me.
Yeah, what I really like about this funnel is a very important word, which is just in front of sales, and it says profitable sales. Because I would like to take, I would like to take, as I did in my book as well, I would take extend the funnels, because most of the funnels, if you look them up on internet, they stop after sales. So we have campaign in the boardroom because we are very happy with the marketing campaigns, with all those leads that came in, and then sales who were able to convert them to customers. But then we forget about finance and about profitability. Because I would like to take it further and see when this customer, when this prospect lead really becomes a customer, will it be a profitable customer for us? So maybe next time we don't have champagne already in the boardroom, we just wait a couple of months and see what finance and service are telling us about the type of customers that we took in. And maybe we should be happy with less leads and less conversion, but a higher profitability of sales and the customers we take in. So I really like that addition to this funnel. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I like and I like the funnel shape because I still, a lot of people question the funnel, but when you talk about buyer behaviors and the fact that people have to go through the stages, fewer and fewer progress to the next stage. So as long as you kind of keep that concept in mind, we might market to 100,000, engage 15,000, convert 1,000, but might be 200 out of the 1,000 driving the bulk of that volume. And so when we look at what we're trying to measure and what we're trying to manage in terms of ROI, we're trying to say if we change one thing, that kind of highlighted area, what's the impact likely to be in terms of the full flow through and flowing out in terms of incremental? So this is the concept of incremental, saying, it could be one more touch point, one more channel. It could be increasing the offer. It could be anything we do different. It's going to change the buyer behavior of some portion of those people, and that's going to net out, and it should flow through. Now, if we got more engagement or more awareness and it didn't flow through, doesn't do much in terms of the financial outcome, right? So that's that mindset we want. And so then if we look at the funnel flow, then we can click to the next one, because the piece that then ties into that is, it's this bottom corner here that says, look, customer value matters too. And you can look at that lots of different ways, from how much they buy to, they might buy a high volume, but we have heavy discounts or low margins. But that idea of getting to lifetime value, and this one kind of connects it all together and really says that there's 3 metrics that drive ROI. One is that volume. How many did we get to buy? The second one's the value. How much are they worth? And then the third one's kind of the expense. What's the investment that comes into that? And if you change any one of those and hold the other 2 constant, that's how you can improve ROI. But sometimes it gets a little bit complicated, or not complicated, maybe just less obvious, where you have to convince management that, look, fewer sales of higher value is actually a better financial decision, financial outcome. So I always like to bring it back to these three big ones. All right, and so this is where we could go. So if we know what we're looking for financially, then we have to get to how do we get to those outcomes. And I think this is where we start getting into the what really matters to marketers, and maybe what's the complexity is what's incremental. And so if we look at this from the measurement technique side, but also from our desired outcome, right? So every business will maybe measure different units in terms of what their outcomes are, and their time periods can be different, weeks, months, quarters, right? Some people. So what we're trying to visualize here, and we're focused in on number 1 here, that incremental contribution, is we could, whether it's a group of people or whether it's a business unit or whatever we're tracking, we could tend to track this top line of, hey, what are we selling? What we don't know is what would have happened in the absence of that marketing. That's what we're calling the baseline in this example, right? So we're trying to say, well, what's that lift? And we have to call the baseline business as usual, which means there could be, for some companies, hundreds of touch points or campaigns out there. And for others, maybe there's not much marketing. But, if we add one more marketing piece or whatever we're putting out there into the mix, do we see a lift there? And so so let's first define that, and then I'll get into the measurement techniques. But I want to give you the chance to kind of, I know you have some thoughts and questions on that.
Yeah, so if you allow me, because maybe not everybody is familiar with the pre and post analysis, it is all about that marketeers are defining their campaigns and thinking about all the activities that they're going to do. And they know how much the investments are, because they get quotes from their agencies and for the media. So they can build their pre-ROI analysis, meaning that they know, okay, we're about to bring in so much customers, and we work together with finance to tell us how much from the revenue will be profit. And afterwards, they got the real figures, because then they really know how much customers came in, which they bought, how much profit we have there. And then you compare those two and make sure for the next time that they're closer together than the previous campaign that you've done. So pre-post analysis may be one of the most important parts of this work, and just to make sure that you know at forehand how much you're going to earn, whether the ROI is up till the hurdle rate, the minimum rate that we would like to see in ROI, and in your post analysis, of course, you would like to meet or be a little bit better than your pre-ROI that you have calculated. Yeah.
Right, okay. And actually, what you're talking about is wait, we want to go back to that next one.
Sure. Yeah.
What you're talking about in the pre-post, I just wanted to make sure you if you had any questions on incremental, but what I wanted to talk about was the 4 techniques under incremental. And what I have listed as pre-post is a little bit more of the granular one. I think what you have is the process one, and the idea of, and that's what the next slide actually gets into, is the to make sure we're doing the planning ROI and the post-campaign measurement. But from a measurement technique, because the big question is, how do I know what's incremental? And so these are the 4 categories of measurement, and actually every type of measurement has to fit into one of these 4 categories. I haven't found anything that falls out of that. But one is the more of a direct results tracking is, if I know who I marketed to, and I could track them, I could just say, well, I sent them this marketing and they bought. So that is I'll call it single attribution, right? But it's kind of the assumption is, well, if I didn't send them the marketing, they wouldn't buy. So it's just a straightforward results tracking. Yeah. The pre-post comes in. A lot of companies that sell through retail use a pre-post, and what the assumption there is, there's kind of a run rate of a sales level. So I'm saying my sales are on average around this. So let's look at like weeks 1 through 4. So you have a run rate in this example. And then I might not be able to see the baseline, but what I might do is kind of project out that says, well, I'm going to apply this average going forward. And if I could get my sales higher, I'm going to assume that campaign I kicked in week 4 going into week 5 was the cause of that. So both of those are, they're subject to error, but they're not expensive, so we tend to use them. Whereas the next 2 are a little bit more advanced, right? Market testing, we would have a control group running and that is the baseline. So very scientific. If we set up the experiment right, we could say 2 groups were similar. They should have followed the same path. One got marketing, one didn't. We could see the difference, right? And then the modeling, that the real advanced one, where there's so many touch points and so many things happening that the baseline really has to be calculated statistically. So that one is, it could take into account competitive activity, economic conditions, the fact that at the same time we launched our campaign, another group launched a different campaign and had a huge advertising spike. And so that helps us kind of remove all these other factors and come down just to the one element we're trying to measure. So I just wanted to hit on those 4 different methodologies because, again, the biggest question tends to be, how do I know what's incremental?
Yeah, and the interesting part of market testing and modeling is that you have to have a sponsor high up in the organization, because if we're looking at the short term, we don't want to invest in market testing and we don't want to invest in modeling. We just need more campaigns to get more customers in. That's a short-term vision. But if you're looking for the longer term, you would like to get better customers in, have a higher conversion rate, and then you absolutely need market testing and modeling.
Right. And that's where some of those things on the bottom, like the diagnostics, is to say, well, no matter if we get a lift or no lift, we want to know what worked and what didn't, right? So did we get people through the buyer's journey or not? Where did they fall out? Did certain segments do well and not others? And then the part I think you were referring to is this predictive is, I might generate certain sales, but I'm really interested in that future value as well, so I don't get too short-term focused. If I get someone that buys a small quantity, but they're a big client and we win them over, I need to account for that, right? I want to motivate that behavior and that outcome.
Yeah, right. And for the segmentation analysis, I think it's quite important as well to do a non-response analysis. Sometimes that's forgotten, just looking at the response. But it's also interesting to find out why people didn't respond, and maybe you shouldn't have targeted them in the first way. All
right, so this is the last one. This is just to say, all right, we have the kind of the definition of ROI. We have measurement techniques. So how do we anticipate this working? And this one, I think, comes into play when people ask, how do I get started and do I have to be all in? And so if you look at the center point here, this is kind of the pieces marketing is responsible for, right? We either get objectives from the business or we set objectives, we build the strategy, get into that tactical plan, then we have to execute. We have to make an impact in the marketplace. So you kind of look and say, look, ideally we would plan the ROI scenarios in advance using even a simple spreadsheet. And that's where if I spend the money, what do I believe will happen, even if I can't prove it out? Might not have all the information, so sometimes it's assumption-based. What's interesting is at that stage, you can do trade-offs and say, oh, wait a second, if I spend more, maybe I can make a bigger impact. And if I want to do something different, I build a business case. Then we build the measurement plan. We do that before we're finished with the tactical plan, because sometimes we have to build the variation into it, right? Either a control group, some element of tracking, some variation in the media that's going to help us detect an impact. Then we execute the measurements and come around and wrap up with the with that ROI based on the best information we have available, right? So we always like good measurements, but sometimes we have to use indicators and say, well, I generated a certain number of leads. I'm going to expect or project out sales. I generated a certain amount of revenue. I'm going to project out what I believe. But it's that discipline. So what I say when you say, how do I get started? Well, we can improve measurements. We can start running ROI scenarios. You can take a piece of the process, or you could say, hey, let's do this for one part of our marketing.
Yeah.
A pilot team, a part of the business, someone who has good data. And as we get comfortable with it, we'll expand it out. And you could always make this more complex. You can get into multi-touch, all this other things. But at least people know that, the path can start as simple as a basic spreadsheet and just basic assumptions. And all of a sudden you'll see information you didn't even see before. So.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you look at the blue circles, that is the part where I think sales comes in as well, because you need to have the same objectives, the same strategy, tactical plan, how sales will respond to your marketing campaigns, and what the impact and contribution will be later on. And I think most of the time we do not take enough time, I think, to set the correct measurements, and then we start measuring things, and then when the results come up, we are discussing how the measurements were set, and then it's too late because you can't redo it. So I think at first, before your campaign runs, you really have to be on the same page with sales and finance to make sure that everybody understands the way the measurements are getting into. So you don't have these arguments later on when the results are there, and you want to move on based on the results that you see. Yeah.
You're right. That's one of the best benefits of the ROI scenario, that upfront planning. And agreed, because especially on those financial definitions, you said it from the very beginning. You can't be too strict, otherwise you cut out marketing that would generate sales, which you need. You can't be you can't overcommit or claim too much, because then you're not really helping the business. So sometimes with those definitions, that process of talking it through with finance, it comes down to a simple question. If I spend this money and can generate this outcome, is this good for the business and I should kind of keep doing this? Obviously, I'll aim to improve. And a lot of companies do put a lot of the value on the improvement over the total ROI number. There was one client we had that they would have annual awards for implementing ROI, and someone could go from a negative 30% to a negative 10% and win an award. In other words, the company thinks the sales are important. They don't want to spend more on marketing than they make, but because the discipline of measuring and managing this was new, you don't just cut it out. You don't throw away a campaign that's almost working. You fix it, and so that's part of that process that you want to happen as well.
Yeah, it's like maybe you remember Tom Peters said once. I think it was like reward excellent failures and punish mediocre successes. And that's what I like about marketeers that come to me and explain to me why their campaign didn't work, instead of a marketeer that came to me and said, yeah, I had some success, and said, how come? I don't have a clue. Because sometimes the campaign worked out fine just because of sales, or sometimes the campaign didn't work out fine because there was no collaboration between the marketeer and the salespeople.
Oh my gosh, you're so right.
Yeah, so I really need marketeers to tell me what happened and how they are able to improve. And it's better than just say, well, we've had some results and they are okay. The ROI was plus 1%. Said, okay, is that enough then to pay your salary? Yeah. Right.
Now, the two things I think related to that. One is this idea of the failure and fail fast. In other words, but the key point that I'd take away from your discussion there is that works as long as your measurements are designed to not just it's not measurements and ROI shouldn't be a pass fail, right? It should be it's got to have that diagnostic piece. What worked, what didn't, how do I change it? So I think that's the part of failing fast. But the other part that is for companies that really want to move up the effectiveness curve quickly, it's this concept of experimentation and vary the marketing. If you keep doing one thing, measuring, adjusting, you're going to move very slowly. If you could set up variations in your marketing and kind of be learning maybe 3 or 4 things at a time, that's great. And even having 1 or 2 of those experiments be kind of like very big changes, strategic changes, not just the tactical changes. And how do you see? And then you're not just failing fast or you're learning at a small scale. It's a test cell, but that's where the breakthroughs come. So where you have there's always people in the business that have some type of theory that, hey, if we were able to get these kind of people engaged in this type of content and drive this kind of behavior, we think we've got big upside. Well, let's put that out in the marketplace and let's kind of try to validate it. Small scale, we could refine it, and then once it works, we scale it up and it becomes our core market.
So I would like to discuss with you, if you know about all the marketing costs, as we said, the media, the creative agencies that are working around with commercials for television, radio, and the internet, or whatever channel you're using. But what about getting the added value of marketing really in place? How can we be sure or tell the company, okay, this is because of marketing that we have more revenue and more sales now?
So that's where I would say, I would say when you're choosing your measurements, and what's an interesting process is, how we do, or many companies do market planning for the year, and then they'll adjust, right? But they go into the next fiscal year with a budget and a plan. If we could do that with measurements, it elevates our success very quickly, right? So in a sense, we've got a limited amount of resources to measure, assess, track, all this other things. And if we could go into the next year saying, we want to learn more about big wins, about strategy. Yes, we want to build in campaigns. What I find is, I think your question is, how do we demonstrate the value of marketing? Well, I think by having certain measurements, in other words, probably the key point is, don't think we have to measure everything to build that confidence. So we could take certain campaigns and we could measure certain aspects of that. So when we use modeling, I think we build a lot of confidence with modeling because it takes into account all these different touch points, and it kind of says, all right, every time we increase this type of media, this type of touch point, we did see sales increase. So we have a good confidence that that's how that's contributing. But even when we have results tracking, we say, look, we did all these campaigns and we could, show the results and show the success relative to the high performers relative to the low performers. Yeah. And so I would say first is have some measurements that are meaningful to the executives. Right. That's the first thing. We're trying to say if we're going to prove the value. The next thing, and I always pursue this, instead of doing more measurements, I always advocate demonstrate that you know how to apply the measurements. So if you could come back and say, hey, we measured this, we tracked it, whatever we did, and we feel comfortable that we're saying there's about a 10% ROI, or that we generated $100,000 in sales. Show that you can come back and say, all right, that 10% is now 12%. So it's find one measurement you could be good at, track it, and then go back and apply it and show that you can increase it. Because now what you're trying to do is get the executives to say, if I invest in marketing, I will get a payback. Because all they do otherwise is they hold that budget tight, and they're saying, if I need to make my quarterly numbers, I could take it from here because nothing's going to happen. And it's quite possible nothing would happen in that quarter. But next quarter, it just gets harder because now you're a little bit behind. You have fewer touch points, less content. So how do we flip it around? I think that's part of that journey, right? Is build confidence.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Don't think that it's only for marketeers to work on this proving to the executive board, but try to team up with your finance colleagues and your sales colleagues. Because if you have a presentation together, then the management trusts that all the outcomes are calculated by finance and supported by sales. And sales really needs marketing to get the better results in the next period of time. Let me elaborate a little bit more, and I go back to the slide presentation then and show you let me go to the last one. There it is. And I share it with you. Yeah. There we are. I would like to share you this, what I call the accountable marketing cycle, which starts quite on the left. We need your business strategy in place, and because of the business strategy, you define how to organize your company. So you've got your management, you've got your processes and execution, you've got your culture and people, and your ICT and infrastructure. That's about how you, in general, you build your company. And then if we zoom into marketing activities, we look at the planning, execution, evaluation of the next items, which are research, concepting of new ideas, new products, new services that you are bringing to the market, and the testing of those. And of course, from that you take it on to the product development, the promotion, sales distribution, and product management. And as we discussed before, Jim also talked about campaigns. It's all what we know called campaigns. So whether it's on the internet, on television, on radio, whether it's a mix of all kinds of channels that you're using. And at that time, it's good to calculate the pre-ROI, so that you make sure that when you present to the board and asking for the budget to run your marketing campaign, be sure that your pre-ROI will have a positive hurdle rate, so they will allow you to run the campaign. And as long as you have a track record of post ROI, you probably will be able to get the hands together and get your budget that you need. And then from the campaigns, it's always working on 3 directions, either, which Jim also mentioned earlier in his presentation. You need to build the share of wallet. So you would like to have customers buying more services and products from you. You would like to extend in the way that you get new customers, so there are more customers. This also means that you build on the loyalty of your customers. And then the last one is the lifetime value. So we would like to keep customers longer on board. We discussed that earlier about the loyalty of customers and getting in profitable sales instead of just getting in sales. So you run your campaigns in either one of these 3 directions, and never try to get them all together, because then you will stuck somewhere in the middle. And if you look at the cube in the middle, it's smaller, and you're trying to extend it to the bigger one. And after you've run your campaigns, you will be able to get a post ROI. And from the post ROI, you will be able to see whether your pre-ROI is quite correct or close to correct. And it should be close together, because sometimes people say, hey, it would be very nice if we have a much higher post ROI. And that seems to be okay, but probably you will get some problems with your customers, with your colleagues in production and operations, because it wasn't foreseen that. Sorry, got away because Jim is getting in and out of the room. So your post ROI shouldn't be much higher than your pre ROI, because you didn't foresee then that so much customers were trying to get on to buy your product or they make use of your services. So the pre-ROI is not only for marketing, but it's also information for sales and service people and finance to know what will be the result of your campaigns and what they can expect to. So after the campaigns are run, you're doing what I call the marketing performance management. And sometimes it's only said or talked about like marketing performance measurement, and I think that's too static, because the measurement tells you the results and that's about it. But when I'm managing my marketing performance, and that's why you see the arrows up and down in marketing, I really would like to know how efficient and effective marketing has been for the last couple of campaigns, and how they work together with the other departments within the company, and probably with some suppliers for marketing. And the other thing that might come out from your marketing performance management is that you look, well, okay, marketing and sales did an excellent job. They were really fine, but what we found out is that our strategy or the way our company is organized are not correct. So that's why there are 2 arrows going down to the strategy, and there's one going down in how to organize your company. So that's why the accountability of marketing is much more than just getting some measurements in, and it's really about how do you run your marketing and actually how to run your campaign. If you look at some research on the market, and you can find it quite easily on the internet, then you see that a lot of questions and surveys that have been conducted are to the C-suite, and the C-suite keeps on telling that marketing is crucial for the strategy of a company. But on the other hand, it's hard for marketing to prove and deliver what their contribution is to the bottom line. So on one side, it's really important that marketing is there, and on the other hand, it's very hard for marketing to prove what their added value is. That's something I would like to explain a little bit further. Maybe a simple example is for like an insurance company. Let's say that we are able to track down all the leads that we get from certain websites, and we have a high conversion rate of these customers coming in. They do some calculations on the website, they ask for quotes, and they get signed up at our insurance company. But after a while, we found out that all these customers from certain websites, they don't pay their money on time, they claim a lot, and they make a lot of fuss and troubles to our company. So then we should talk to marketing and sales, explain them that those customers are not a very good deal, and we shouldn't be getting more customers from those websites. And that's why it's so meaningful when you're able to track down where your customers are coming from, and then you're able to improve through over the time to get more profitable customers. That's always a risk when you're getting into live webinars like this one, and I'm very pleased that hardly anybody is signing off or leaving the room. So what I would like to discuss with you, Jim, because I think that would be maybe the last and final question, is whether you think that increasing marketing effectiveness, working with marketing accountability, working with ROI is only for the larger companies, or do you think it's also for small and mid-cap companies?
So there is, it's scalable, I would say, in that you have, the large companies have the advantage of the budget and resources that will let them do very advanced measurements and implement technologies, all of that. So there's no question there's an advantage there. Mm-hmm. The one thing I always encourage small and mid-sized businesses to do is that whole process of ROI scenario planning. Right there, that alone will show you, if I spend this amount of money and I expect marketing to have a certain outcome, how does that outcome eventually make its way through to become sales, revenue, profit? How much do I expect to generate from that spend? Uh-huh. So the two things that happen there, one is you then have the ability to say, well, how does that compare to an alternative way for me to spend that money? And how am I looking in terms of spending across the funnel and not just in one area of the funnel, right? So we have this whole, it's kind of quantifying your strategy. That's a nice way to look at it. But the second thing it does is it's even for a small or mid-sized business, if you expect based on a certain spend to generate incremental outcomes anywhere in the funnel and then flow through, it tells you basically what metrics you need to look for. Right. So if you have some form of tracking, and it gives you some expectation of a change. So if you spend this money and everything kind of remains flat, you have to question whether that was a worthwhile investment. But if you can spend the money and look for indicators, right? So some metrics that give you some indication that it's working, that's I think a very good part of the process, right? It's not going to be perfect and it's not as advanced, but it gives you some feedback. And I think the part that goes along with that in your whatever your measurement and tracking is that if you do more than one strategy, more than one execution, you also have a point of comparison to say, look, at least if I could generate more views of my content with one versus the other, I'm going to say that whatever value content has, it's worthwhile. But if I could take that tracking a little bit further, the biggest challenge I find is more in the volume of response and customers. So a small business that has a handful of customers, it'll be very difficult to figure out the marketing influence on those customers. But the same thing, the one example I used to use in my workshop was if you were selling space shuttles and you had a 10-year sales cycle and you sold 5 space shuttles, you're not going to know what part of marketing and if that golf event and all these things mattered, because there's not your margin of error gets too high with low volume. So it's not a big or small company. It's a volume of so that you could get enough volume to have a good indicator. If people that might sell 10 big accounts a year are going to be more dependent on their leads or other things where you have more volume in terms of assessing their effectiveness.
But there's still one final question, maybe quite an important question, I think.
Yeah.
When I talk to customers every now and then, we just mentioned it earlier in this discussion, is that when we have to invest in the accountability, getting the right measurements, building the right models, doing research, conducting surveys, etc. The management every now and then says, well, hey, Michiel, the $100,000 that we're investing, we can also invest in a marketing campaign or another ad or another, whatever, viral on the internet. So let's do that instead of all this stuff and investments. So can you explain a little bit what your experiences are on the return on investment in marketing?
Right. Is it worth spending money on measurement?
Right. Yeah.
So here's where I would go with that. What's interesting is it takes a very small increase in effectiveness to pay back the measurements, typically. So if similar to what we were talking about in this ROI scenario planning, is if I spend this measurement, do I know how I'm going to apply it? So if I can spend, I'll use some easy round numbers, but if I had $1 million budget and I decided to dedicate 10% of it, $100,000 into that measurement, I would need at least a 10% increase in effectiveness.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the philosophy, and look, I think especially if you're doing next to no measurements, getting a 10% increase is probably not that hard. I had a client in Australia once who was getting zero funding for measurements. So what he decided to do was at the beginning of the year, he took 15% of his budget and he put in measurements analytics, and he didn't, so he had less budget to deliver the same goal. And it was a little bit of a gamble, but what he was able to do was improve effectiveness throughout the year, still hit his goal numbers, and by doing that once, he now had the effectiveness up that at the same budget he could maintain that 15% for measurement, and then he didn't have to self-fund it. Now his top line could grow, right? And in the first year, it was kind of a net even. I spent less, I had better effectiveness, but I delivered on my goals. But I think this is the idea. It's the same discipline we're trying to do with marketing. When you spend marketing dollars, we're asking, know how that's going to flow through to financial income and make sure you could recover that spend at a minimum. When we do the measurement, you have to have some idea of how you're going to apply that measurement in your results. So it can't be about, you're not going to go in and produce a report and say, okay, I'm done. You're going to go in and say, I'm going to change something. So you go for big wins, right? Not a small, fraction of a % increase. What's going to change buyer behavior? I'll add one last thing that I meant to bring up earlier that fits well here. When we look at that buyer's journey, we always report on progress because that's what we've accomplished. But we analyze and focus on leakage because that's our opportunity, right? And if we look at for leakage points late in that buyer's journey, those are the people we focus on, and we say, how do I get a few more of them to successfully complete their journey to the revenue? And that's the idea that says, put your measurement where you can get the payback. Right.
That's where it is. Yeah. I really like what you said about getting a kind of break even the first year. You just invest in marketing accountability and it pays back in the first year. Maybe you don't have an extra bottom line result, but you will have the same result because you will stop the waste of budget. That's quite nice. So I would like to thank everybody. Thank you also for your patience for the technical hiccups we were facing and dealing with today. And we are a little bit over time. We promised it should end at about 2:30. I think it's your time now. It's half past 8 here in Holland. So Jim, really thank you very much for joining me on this webinar. And we'll speak soon to this very important subject. Thank you very much.
Yeah, It's a pleasure, and I'm going to thank you for putting out a book that needed to be written, especially today. People can't lose focus on this marketing accountability. It's a great book, and I thank you very much for putting it out there and including me in on this webinar series you're doing.
Okay, thank you. Bye for now.